Great. All right, we are joined by two wonderful speakers. We're going to start off with our Tennessee speaker this evening. Our national speaker is running a few minutes late, but will join us. And I put, by the way, his book in the chat. So if you'd like to read it, it's published this year. It's terrific. I recommend it. But we're going to start off with Carla Torres Suero is a founding member of Torres Suero Immigration Law Firm in Knoxville. Before opening her private practice, she worked for the American Bar Association's Pro Bono Asylum Representation Project. Carla holds a BS in Industrial and Organizational Psychology from the University of Puerto Rico, a JD from the PUC-PR School of Law, and an LLM in International Criminal Justice and Human Rights from the University of Kent. Please give a warm welcome to Carla. And Carla, please proceed.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Marlene. Thank you, everyone, for showing up here today. I know it's 8 p.m. It's probably difficult for everyone, so I'm going to try to make it as smooth as possible. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Can you hear me just fine? Perfect. Awesome. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I'm going to be talking about due process, but more of the due process on the immigration context. I'm going to start talking a little bit. I'm giving some background. Once I share my screen, I won't be able to see you. So if there's any questions or you have any trouble like listening to me or understanding me, just please feel free to jump in, okay?
Or put something in the chat and we'll address it. Thank you.
Perfect. Exactly. Okay. Okay, can you let me know if you can see my presentation? Perfect, awesome. Okay, perfect. So just an overview of what I'm planning to talk about today. We're going to be talking about what I call here non-citizens, which will include everyone that is here in the US that is not a US citizen. That's particularly for this presentation, so you understand like who I'm talking. It could be people that have no legal status at all. It could be people that have some sort of temporary status. It could be people that have like a residence card or something like that. All of it's included when I say non-citizens. We're going to talk about a little bit about due process. And I say here immigration court because the majority of the examples that I'm going to be given to you are in the immigration court scenario, but we're going to talk in general, right? Then we're going to discuss a little bit the due process safeguards in the immigration process. Then I'm going to be explaining some of the due process challenges in my experience that I have seen here, like practicing immigration. And we're going to go briefly to some local stories, good and bad, the good and the bad, about the immigration enforcement here. It's based on my experience. So it's basically here in Knoxville and also Nashville mostly. Okay. Okay. So first of all, I'm looking forward to the next presentation because we're going to have a general context of due process. But here, we're going to start saying like non-citizens, do they have the right of due process? Because like we're saying, they are not US citizens. And the question is yes. Basically, when we talk about due process is something that is like a core principle that focuses on all people. They have to be here in the US, but it includes like immigrants, it includes people that have like the US citizenship. It protects everyone in general. So the answer is yes, like non-citizens do have some due process rights. So what does it mean for someone that is a non-citizen to have due process? So, okay. So if you're a non-citizen, due process rights are not absolute. Probably the coverage is less than what it will be for a US citizen, but it requires like the right to of fair treatment under the law. That's in general, which means like fair procedures to treat everyone the same with fairness when making decisions. And in particular, everything that covers like anything that could affect people's lives, liberty, or their property. So there's a lot that we can put in there to okay. Okay, so let's talk about the due process in the immigration context. If we're going to talk about examples, we're talking about the right to notice, the opportunity to be heard, the right to challenge the government actions in court, among other different safeguards. That's how it looks like, right? Okay, so here I have a few examples about how can you see due process, or how can you challenge due process when someone is in an immigration proceeding? Sorry, is someone trying to ask me a question? Or okay, I'm gonna go ahead. I think I'm gonna mute someone. Oh, perfect. If you were trying to do a question, I'm so sorry. I think I mute someone. Okay, we're good.
We'll
If
keep
you were trying,
everyone muted, and then at the end, we'll have questions.
beautiful. Thank you. Okay. So let me give you some background. When I say immigration proceedings, let's say is someone that is here in the US and is doing some type of process to try to get lawful status. I'm just trying to put it in general, right? So there's different immigration agencies here in the US that treat like different kind of like applications or petitions from non-citizens. As an example, there's the USCIS is one of the office. The Immigration Court is a different office or agency. There's what we all know as ICE, Customs and Immigration, right? So here are the examples that I'm going to give you so you can see how due process looks for non-citizens are more in the immigration court context. So for someone to have a case in the immigration court, basically it means that the government is trying to deport them. And that sounds ugly, at least when my clients hear about it the first time, but it's really not. It means that the government is giving you the opportunity to prove whether you have any form of immigration relief to stay here or not. So it's a good thing. So these examples are in that context. Usually when people receive a notification, that's the notice of appear, and we're going to talk a little bit more about it. And it says, hey, hello, there was an encounter, and we noticed that you didn't have like any paperwork to show us that either you have legal status here or that you are a US citizen. So we're putting you in removal proceedings, which means we are trying to remove you because you're not like a US citizen and couldn't show that you have any status or any legal paperwork, but we're going to give you the opportunity to prove whether that's true or not. So it's positive. So here the due process looks like the first thing is the notice to appear. That's exactly the example I am giving you. The person is hearing for the first time. I'm giving you a notice that you need to appear in an immigration court. Why? Because the government is trying to remove you, but you're going to have the opportunity to prove whether you can stay or not. So that notice is usually it's in English, usually depending on the personal circumstances of the non-citizen. Sometimes it's required that whoever's explains that notice to appear, explains it to you in your native language. But the document is usually in English, right? And that's the first notice that non-citizens usually receive, letting them know that the government is trying to deport them. Okay. So I think I have an example of all of the documents. So I'm gonna move. We're gonna discuss all of them. So I'm gonna move particularly to the notice to appear. So this is an example of how a notice to appear looks. And hopefully, probably you cannot see it clearly, but it will have your name here. It will have your name. It will have your personal information, like your address. The government, once they encounter someone that is a non-citizen, they give you a specific number, which they call it the alien number. And that number is like a social security number. It stays with you forever. And it will identify you whether you come to the US in the future, or you have another immigration process in the future. That's going to be your number forever. So here, basically, you're going to see, can you see my mouse? Like when, okay, no? Okay, that's fine. You see some boxes, 3 boxes, and one has like a check mark in the middle. Basically, that says how you enter the United States. Usually the first one, if you enter with authorization, like you try to apply to enter, it's gonna have an X on the first box. If you were present in the United States, when you encounter an immigration officer, is gonna be the second one. And if you encounter an immigration officer while you were in the US and you already have like a deportation order or something that you can be removed, that would be the third one, right? So here, where it says number 1, 2, 3, you're gonna have allegations. If we talk about criminal procedures, it will be probably like charges or accusations, right? But here is more of allegations. Why are you receiving a notice to appear? Well, the first step is that you're not a US citizen, because if not, this wouldn't be happening, right? The second is, where are you from? Like, are you a native or a national from where? And the third here, because it could have more allegations, is basically, why are we charging you? Whether you didn't have like any valid documentation, blah, blah, blah. Okay, due process here. Why it's so important. At the bottom, you will see it's very small, but it says you are ordered to appear. That's why it's a notice to appear. You need to show up somewhere, right? You are ordered to appear where? And it gives you the address. This is the address of the Memphis Immigration Court. There's no secrets. That's why it's not like redacted. When? And you will see here that there's a date, October 9, 2024. When? And there's also a time. Why this screams due process? This is very important. First of all, this is the first document that probably the person is receiving, letting them know that they are about to experience a legal process with the immigration agencies, and they need to show up somewhere. So if for some reason there's no information about where you need to show up, when you need to show up, and at what time, what do you think would happen to that person? There are many problems about the document. For example, the language could be one of those. But most important, like if you have this document with the information where you have to appear, you can have somewhere translated for you or whatever, right? So when there's a problem of due process, when you receive one of these notifications and you have no idea where to appear, there's a notice to appear. And that's why it's so important in terms of due process that the notice includes where, when, and at what time. Let me check my time. Okay. Okay, notice of hearing. This is a different notice that is common in the immigration process, and it lets you know that you have a court hearing. On the notice to appear, which is the first document that the person usually receives, it could have like the date, the place, and the time, but sometimes it doesn't. And that could be fixed if in the future, before that scheduled hearing, the government shares with you, like gives you a notice of hearing. It's completely different because it won't have the allegations, like the document we saw before. This is just for the purpose of letting you know that you have a hearing at the immigration court. So if for some reason the first document doesn't have where you have to appear, when, and at what time, it can be fixed with this notice, because it gives you the information about like when, where, and at what time. This is a completely different document, right? But it's very important that the person understands where they need to show up. Okay, this is a second example of what like due process looks like, and it's the notification to the non-citizen to show up, right?
Carla,
Okay.
your presentation is not currently showing.
Oh, what can you see? So sorry.
I just see you.
Oh, for real? Give me a break. Sorry. Thank you so much.
We're following you without it, but I just thought you should know.
Please, did you were able to see the notice of hearing or no?
Yes, we did.
Okay, let me go back.
Yeah.
So I was I was watching the presentation.
Yeah, I
Can you
saw
work
it
with me?
too.
Mhm.
I
Can
can
you
see
see
it.
it now?
Now I can see it again. Thank you.
Perfect. No, please feel free to jump in and let me know, because if not, I just keep talking and talking and talking. Okay. So another example of due process in the immigration court, because this is all related to an immigration court hearing. This is an example of a notice to appear that doesn't have the date, the place, or the time. So here the structure of the document looks different in terms of where the information is at, but it all has the same information that a notice to appear should have. The first document I show you. Allegations, like how you enter, and at the bottom, here you will see the immigration court where your hearing will be scheduled. And I know it's very small, but here you do have the where. It says your order to appear where, and you do have the Charlotte Immigration Court, but you have no idea from this document when and at what time. And that's basically a due process violation. It's worrisome because the person doesn't know when they need to show up. Again, if in the future you receive a notice of hearing letting you know the specific date and time, then it's all been fixed. But if not, this is a problem because the person won't know like where to show up to see an immigration judge. Okay, so this is an example of how a notice to appear, which is the first document I showed you, looks like without due process. Basically, no information about when I need to show up, no information about at what time. Okay, are you with me? Can you see my select? Perfect. Okay. So due process in the immigration context, when we're talking about a fair hearing, what does that mean? Like we said, with an immigration proceedings, due process is not like black and white, but it does require a fair hearing. No, okay. So that basically means that the person had the that the person had the opportunity to present like any type of evidence, the opportunity to be heard, if they have any sort of testimony or whatever. They should have the opportunity also, if the government attorney has any proof against them, they should have the opportunity to ask questions, right? But in general terms, it basically says the process, the hearing, the immigration court hearing should conform to traditional standards of fairness, which is pretty general, right? But I'm gonna give you a few examples of what could probably be a problem of fairness. If there wasn't an interpreter, language in immigration proceedings is very important because the majority of the non-citizens Many of them are bilingual, but mostly they only speak their main language, right? So there should be an interpreter, because if they don't have the opportunity to understand what they have, the questions they are receiving, the rights and all of it in their language, they are not understanding the process. So that's one of the examples of like what a fair hearing should have, right? Legal representation. Legal representation in immigration proceedings is guaranteed as long as the person can pay for it. It's not like in criminal procedures, like procedures that if you are charged with something criminal, you are entitled to an attorney, and if you cannot pay for it, the government will. Well, here, one of your rights is that you are allowed to have an attorney, but you need to pay for it. But when you start an immigration case with the immigration court, that's basically the first thing you hear from the judge. You are allowed to have an attorney at your own cost. Okay. Habeas. I'm giving some space because I feel like the picture is kind of funny. But habeas is something that, and more recently, like we use a lot in immigration. And we use it a lot to try to get people out of detention. And lately it's been a challenge, and I think I'm gonna talk about that more in the future. But it's one of the resources that is part of the due process, and we use it to tell the immigration court if we're asking for a bond or if we're asking for parole with ICE or whatever. Hey, my client has been detained for way too long. You cannot hold them in detention forever. And we use the Constitution, which is like where we get the due process rights with the resource of habeas corpus to try to get people out of detention. That's one of the examples. Okay. We're going to talk about the challenges to due process, and I'm going to try to also give some examples about what I've seen here in Tennessee. I don't know if you heard, I'm going to start with expedited removal. I don't know if you heard about expedited removal before or recently, because a lot has changed with expedited removal since January. But basically, from the beginning, I've been telling you and explaining you about immigration court procedures and how when the government starts an immigration process or a deportation process, the government is trying to deport or remove a person, but they have the opportunity to prove otherwise, like whether they have an immigration relief or not. So expedited removal is the contrary of it. It's basically the government removes the person without any opportunity of proving if you have an immigration relief or anything like that. And why I'm saying that, probably you have heard a lot about it or something about it in the past few months, is because it was expanded. Before, there were some limitations about who could be in expedited removal and who was basically guaranteed the deportation process, right? The opportunity of seeing a judge, blah, blah, blah. So in January, it was extended to way more people, like more people can be removed without the opportunity of proving that they have an immigration relief. And that's why it's a challenge. Detention. Sorry, I've been talking a lot. Detention, okay. So this has been a challenge. It has always been a challenge, even for us immigration attorneys or attorneys. Having a client that is detained presents a lot of challenges in terms of how to communicate with the person, how to have the person sign documents, all of it, right? But in general, it's very difficult. The majority of people that are in detention probably will change their mind in the future about seeing a complete immigration case from beginning to an end because they don't want to be detained. So there's multiple challenges about detention, but I'm just gonna keep moving so I can talk a little bit about what's going on in here. Okay, so arresting asylum seekers at immigration courthouses. Have you heard about that in the news recently? And if not, it's fine. I'm just gonna tell you a little bit about it. So lately we've been seeing some news saying that ICE is showing up, ICE agents are showing up at the immigration court to arrest people. It's not everyone, right? Usually they wait until the end of some sort of immigration procedure, because like any other type of case with the court, even if it's not immigration, there's like a trial or an end of it, right? So sometimes it happens that when that person has like that trial court, or what we call the merits of the case they're seeing, like if they're seeking any sort of immigration application, there's gonna be, let's say, like a final hearing to see the case in the merits of the case. So sometimes ICE is waiting at the end if for some reason the outcome is not a grant of relief. Sometimes they are taking people detained. That's what we've been seeing. Another example, and this is from what I've seen in Memphis, another example is that people, non-citizens, that have been in the United States for less than 2 years, and it doesn't matter if they receive a notice to appear, they have the opportunity to show up in front of a judge to prove, like, if they have an immigration relief case. If they haven't been here for 2 years, the government is moving to try to dismiss, close the case, the pending case with the immigration court, and putting them in challenge number 1, expedited removal. And that's another example of if you have heard in the news, there's ICE agents arresting people in the immigration courts. That's 2 examples that I have witnessed, at least in the immigration court in Memphis. Okay.
Carla,
Why is it? Yes, of course.
just want to let you know that Brandon has joined us, and we are
Perfect.
at the 30-minute mark. So I wanted to make sure we have time to do our second speaker.
Lovely. Okay, perfect. So basically I already talked about the last challenge. So another one briefly, I don't know if you heard about it, is like removing people from the US to a safe third country. What does that mean? If the person is here trying to ask for a humanitarian relief, like asylum, that they fear to be returned to their country, Venezuela, Honduras, like any sort of country, well, if you cannot be returned to your country, I'm gonna return you to a different safe third country. So that's the third example. So I'm almost done, and I wanna, yes, I'm going to talk about, this is some of the new things that we have been seeing here in Tennessee, the Centralized Immigration Enforcement Division. That's basically an operation that allows like different 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 enforcement agencies to work all together to help enforce like immigration here in Tennessee. That's particularly here in Tennessee. It could involve like local police working with ICE, etc. Actually, I think I have given you real case stories about like what's been going on at the Memphis Immigration Court. I'm gonna give you a few positive stories, at least working with USCIS, which is a different agency that is not the immigration court. We see a lot of family petitions, like if I have a relative and I have status and I want to petition my relative that doesn't have status. Usually we do that with USCIS. And so far, there hasn't been like any trouble with those petitions, even though there's like a few stories about like how they are probably not granting or whatever, everything's working smoothly with USCIS, at least at this, in my experience here. And let me see if I'm just gonna wrap up. And if you have any questions, you can ask me more. I don't want to take more of your time. Why is important to protect due process for non-citizens? What I always say, due process, it is basically a core principle for all people. So it's really important that if we neglect or forget that non-citizens have due process, it could mean that in the future, like all citizens could also have the same trouble. So I think it's very important to remember that due process is for everyone. So if it's affecting non-citizens, it could probably end up affecting all of us. I think access to popular education for all of us to understand how things work, and also for non-citizens is very important. And I think at the end, it all comes to the fact that we should promote like fair treatment for absolutely everyone, and that includes like non-citizens here in the US. I
Wonderful.
think that was it.
We'll
Thank
we'll
you.
we'll address questions at the end. I see we have a couple, but I'll get back to those at the end. Thank you, Carla. That
Perfect.
very enlightening. Learned a lot, and I hope everybody else did too. We are now going to go to Brandon Garrett, who is the L. Neil Williams Jr. Professor of Law at Duke University School of Law. He's the author of several books, including the recently published Defending Due Process: Why Fairness Matters in a Polarized World. Welcome, Brandon, and if you could share your screen and your presentation, that would be fantastic.
Sure, it's great to be here, and thank you. It was really nice to meet you on Zoom, Carl. I really enjoyed hearing that at the end of your talk, and there's a lot to talk about in Tennessee and around the country. So thank you all for taking time on a Thursday night to talk about procedural due process. So I'm going to talk about some broader themes, and I'll share my screen in a second. I guess I didn't really think that when I began working on this book that procedural due process would be a topic of regular nationwide conversation. And I'm, sorry to say that it is. This is the Zoom is asking me things. I'm going to try to put it in presentation mode. So that's the book that came out earlier this year. And in some ways, the goal of writing this book was to convince people that procedural due process faces three major types of challenges, both in society and in the courts and because of technology. I was trying to convince people that procedural due process really matters and giving examples around the country to try to illustrate why this really is a national problem. I'm not sure people need convincing that procedural due process is a national issue anymore. And there is litigation all around the country, including on the topics that Carla was just talking about. And we've seen people dig in much more into, wait a minute, like, can people actually be detained without any hearing, without some kind of proceeding in front of a judge? Can people be removed from the country without that? Can people be fired from government jobs without some kind of a hearing, without notice of what's happening? Can people lose their health benefits? So all the types of life, liberty, or property issues where we count on some kind of fairness before the government takes an action, they're all being tested. And so, unfortunately, I wrote a book that's relevant. I'll give you an overview of it, and I can't wait to hear your questions. So, one example that I begin the book with is a case from Florida. There's actually a quite similar case that was brought in Tennessee. There's another similar case that was brought in North Carolina. There's several cases around the country where during the COVID-19 pandemic, people's eligibility for Medicaid couldn't be reviewed. Basically, people were entitled to keep their benefits, no alteration of people's benefits, given that national emergency. But about 2 years ago, plus another month, in March of 23, I guess, that protection expired, the CARES Act expired, and so all of a sudden states could start reviewing people's eligibility for Medicaid, and many millions of people lost their benefits. This was a notice given to a woman named Xian. Her last name is anonymized, including because minor children were part of the case. She had two young kids. One was an infant, and she only learned that her Medicaid was going to be cut off when she was trying to schedule a 30-day well visit after giving birth. And that's it's been a while since my kids were infants, but that was I remember how momentous that was to like, okay, is the baby okay? And she's scheduling the visit, and they say, well, you don't have health insurance. I don't know how we can schedule this. You better figure out what's going on because you don't have insurance. She's like, what? My family's been on Medicaid. Nothing's changed. No one has new income. No one has anything. And she had not received any actual notice that something was happening. But she was told that the doctor's office, I don't know, like check the portal. And she'd never been told there was a portal, but it turns out in Florida there is the Medicaid, the state health agency has a portal, an online portal. She goes on it, never knew that it existed, and sees this document which says you're receiving the same type of assistance from another program. And she looks at that, and that was a notice. But the question is this fair or meaningful notice? She had no idea what it meant. She's like, what? I don't have health insurance from anyone else. Like, what does this even mean? And how do I understand this? Like, what do I do about it? And there was no explanation. So when people talk about procedural due process, they talk about the entitlement first to get notice that the government is taking action against you, and like a meaningful notice. There was a notice once she found out where it was, but it didn't say anything that was clear or accurate. To give a second example, example number 2 that I talk about in the book, a number of teachers in Harris County, Texas, that includes Houston and a lot of surrounding areas. It's a very large county. The public school district there did give notice to many teachers that their performance was subpar and that they were going to be reviewed, potentially disciplined or fired because their performance was subpar. So they also got notice that something was going to happen to them, that they could lose their jobs as public school teachers. But the notice didn't explain what was happening. What they were told was that basically we're using a new algorithm based on software to evaluate how your students are doing over time. And guess what? It's objective. It's not going to punish you if you're teaching at-risk kids or English as a second language kids or kids with disabilities or special education kids. No. It's going to control for that. It's going to look at your scores and performance over time in your classes. It's very fair. And lo and behold, teachers who are teaching, who'd run awards for teaching at-risk kids, low-income kids, special education kids, were the ones who got these notices. And so they wanted to know, like, you say your scoring system is unbiased, it's fair. Well, how does it work? You've given us notice that you want to discipline us or fire us, but what are the actual reasons? How is this software working? How is it calculated? Because it seems like there's something clearly wrong here. These award-winning teachers who then sued, saying that their due process rights were being violated, were being singled out, and they wanted to understand why. And the school district's response was, we can't tell you why. It's like a corporate provider. The company won't tell us. They say their software is very good. It's very accurate. It's objective. So that's why they sued. Third example, this is a case out of New Jersey. Mr. Juan Arteaga here was arrested. And they said, the eyewitness has identified you as the person who held up at gunpoint an employee at a not a convenience store, sort of like a phone repair shop. They sold cell phones and other things. And someone goes behind the clerk's desk and pulls out a gun, threatens the person, takes the money and leaves. Caught on camera. And none of that would be out of the ordinary. And there are issues regarding the reliability of eyewitness memory, but cases can go forward because an eyewitness says that's the guy. What was interesting here was the eyewitness couldn't say anything about who the attacker was until they did a facial recognition search. And the facial recognition, apparently there was some kind of a hit to his face. And he says, that's not me. I don't know how the facial recognition worked. And it was because of the facial recognition that they picked his image out to show it to the clerk, who then said, oh yeah, I think that's the guy. And so the defense lawyer in the case says, okay, we understand, like, there's no lack of notice. We know what he's being arrested for. They've described the crime, and we know why they say that there's probable cause. But what we want to understand here is, like, how do we defend ourselves in this case if we don't know how he was picked? How did this facial recognition system work? Which system was it? What other faces did it pick out? Was his, like, the top choice or the fifth choice or the 20th choice? Uh, how reliable is this facial recognition system? It's the main reason he is a suspect in this case. And so we should be told that, because we're entitled to information and discovery in a criminal case, some at least. What's this facial recognition system? How does it work? We should be entitled to it as a matter of basic due process to have a fair trial, because otherwise we can't defend ourselves if we don't know why he was singled out as a suspect. And that was their due process argument in this criminal case in New Jersey. So three different examples, three very different settings, all situations where procedural due process was an issue. One last one, which if any of you saw the Oppenheimer movie, this is someone who did not bring a case that involved a trial. It was a more informal government hearing. And so I also want to highlight that procedural due process matters, even if it's not a civil rights case filed in court or a criminal case where there could be a trial. In many situations where the government is threatening to take away one's benefits, it's a hearing. And even in criminal cases, there are preliminary hearings, bail hearings, hearings before immigration judges, right? Those aren't regular judges. They work for the immigration authorities. And so those hearings aren't in a federal court, although there's sometimes the possibility of challenging what happens in a federal court, but it's hard to do. Anyway, in the Oppenheimer case that was depicted in this movie, there were multiple things that were unfair about his non-trial, but it wasn't a trial. And when we think about the elements of due process, I've talked about notice, some kind of a meaningful hearing before a neutral decision maker where you can make your case, where you can test what the government wants to do to you. It's not like the government can't fine people, take away their property. It's not like they can't dismiss employees or terminate someone's Medicaid benefits if they engage in fraud. But you should have some opportunity to contest those charges before someone impartial. It doesn't necessarily have to be a federal judge in a courthouse. It can be a hearing, but it has to be a fair hearing. In an Oppenheimer case, it was famously not a fair hearing. The judge sort of had a vendetta against him, and it was about revoking his security clearance to work with nuclear, secrets and planning and the like. But it ended his career to not have that access. And so, although it wasn't something in court, it had a big impact on his life, and the movie sort of highlights this, with Robert Downey Jr. memorably playing the administrator that headed in for Oppenheimer. There is also a due process right to some kind of an appeal, maybe not an elaborate multi-level appeal if it's not a criminal case, but certainly in a criminal case, the stakes are even greater, and so due process adapts to the stakes. And so in criminal cases, we're entitled to, like, multiple levels of an appeal. This is an image from a well-known appeal of Meek Mills, who only finally sort of got out from under years and years of very intrusive probation supervision. Finally, evidence of serious police misconduct came out, and really only on appeal was that evidence introduced and his conviction was reversed. So in general, due process involves this idea of some notice, like advance notice before the government does something serious to you, some opportunity to get a hearing before someone impartial, before the government takes away life, liberty, or property. And so that covers a lot of things that affect our lives, right? Everything from the employment of a teacher to health benefits, to someone being arrested in a serious criminal case. And by the way, like, lots of other pieces of the law reflect the importance of due process rights. And so it's not just in the Constitution, but like the Medicaid Act reflects this commitment to due process and says people like Cheyenne were supposed to be given detailed, accurate, clear statements, not like the notice she actually got. It's supposed to explain exactly why they want to take your Medicaid away so that you know what to do in response. You could look at it and say, oh yeah, they're right. I actually have a new job now. My income has changed. I'm not eligible anymore. Or they can look at it and say, no, this is clearly wrong. Nothing has changed, and we need to correct this mistake. And so lots of other statutes reflect our commitment to due process. And yet, like, how is it that the entire state of Florida was sending out these notices that didn't tell people anything meaningful about what they were doing? How could they just not comply with the due process clause and with statutes reflecting it? And what didn't just happen to her? It was tens of thousands of people. A large class action case was filed challenging what was happening in Florida. Uh, what was really fascinating to me was after the book came out, or it already, was being printed and came out in England, uh, this class action case challenging what they did in Florida uh, actually went to a trial. It went to a trial pretty quickly. So I've read the trial transcripts. Really, really interesting to actually hear the Florida administrators have to explain, like, well, why didn't you give people specific reasons in the notices? Like, why didn't you tell them what was actually happening in their cases? Like, what would have cost you? You must have had information to justify decisions like this. Why didn't you tell people what it was? And they had also said false things. So it turns out people like Cheyenne were entitled to keep their Medicaid benefits unconditionally for a year after giving birth. They never told her that. They couldn't terminate her Medicaid legally for a year because she was a new parent. Instead, they did terminate her Medicaid benefits for reasons that were inaccurate. But the notice also never told the basic problem with what they were doing, which was even if there had been a problem because she had some issue of parallel coverage, which she didn't, but even if that had been true, they couldn't cut off her benefits because she just given birth. And this was happening systematically all across the state. There were a lot of new parents that were part of this case. Um, and the administrator sort of said, "Oh yes, we had mistakes, but we had call centers. Maybe they could have fixed those mistakes." And there are all these horror stories of people waiting for hours to get through the call center. Cheyenne called the call center over and over again because she was desperate. The bill, she had actually her older child, who's a 2-year-old, had very expensive medication, very serious health condition, respiratory condition, and they were having to start to pay out of pocket thousands and thousands of dollars for these medications. They couldn't afford them. She was falling behind on her medicine. She had to be hospitalized. It was like sort of horror after horror in terms of what was happening to this family, just one of the families affected by this horribly unfair process that they had, where they were making errors and they weren't explaining what was happening to people. If they had explained, the errors would have been even more apparent. And when people tried to call a person, having gotten these like sort of robo notices, like Cheyenne was told multiple times, "I'm sorry, we're not supposed to speak to, we can't be on the phone for more than 20 minutes. After waiting for hours to talk to a person, they would sort of hang up on her after 20 minutes. So all kinds of bad in-person process, all kinds of bad automated process. And ultimately, this case went to a trial, and they said that the judge found this a due process violation. And there's still sort of post-trial work being done to figure out what the remedy is, and there's some new motions and things. So nothing has exactly happened yet in the case. It's still dragging on. But at least for now, a very good statement from the judge that this absolutely was an unfair process under the due process clause. The Houston case actually went well too. I'm giving positive examples, happy examples. There's a nice documentary called Coded Bias, which tells the stories of some of these teachers that were targeted by this algorithm made by a statistics software developer. And what was interesting was, well, once experts actually, as part of the lawsuit, the plaintiff said, we want our experts, like we want statisticians to look at this software and to understand what data it was using. We want them to look at the code because this doesn't make sense. Like it's clearly punishing teachers that are teaching at-risk kids. It's not this objective software. It's biased in exactly the ways that the developer says it shouldn't be. And ultimately, when they did get it, the judge ordered that they be provided access, which the developer didn't want to give them. They found that there were serious errors. And in fact, the software was biased in exactly the way that these teachers felt like it must have been because it was singling them out. And the judge wrote good rulings saying that the scores seemed to be erroneously calculated for a number of reasons. There were data entry mistakes. There were problems with the code. And ultimately, the judge said it violated due process to have this black box code that wasn't disclosed to anyone being used to make important decisions that affect people's careers, their lives, working as public school teachers. And so this was also a successful due process challenge where flawed technology hurt a lot of people's lives. The school district stopped using it. And actually, the American Statistics Association issued a big statement saying, like, school districts should not be using software like this. It's a flawed statistical model. It shouldn't be used anywhere. And actually, many school districts around the country still use it. There have been challenges in other states that have been dismissed. I think there's a challenge in Tennessee that was dismissed. The case didn't go forward for one reason or another. So I wanted to ask a question and then take your questions after saying just a couple more things. One question I asked a lot of people in doing some of the research that led up to this book was this. So there's this famous maxim from Sir William Blackstone, an English jurist, talking about this idea of sort of like, why do we care about due process so much? In criminal cases where liberty is at stake, we really need to care about due process. We need to put our thumb on the scale in favor of the person accused. We need the presumption of innocence. We want process that's going to treat even someone accused of a crime with extreme fairness. And what reflects that? Well, it's better that 10 guilty persons escape than one innocent suffer. So one question for you all is, well, do you believe that? Like, which error is worse? Is it better that does it create a greater is it better that we avoid convicting an innocent person, or that we avoid freeing a guilty person? Or are they both kind of equally serious harms? Is it equally bad to have a guilty person go free versus an innocent person wrongly convicted? And so in doing a lot of different mock jury studies, we asked this simple question, like, which causes more harm to society? Convicting an innocent person, acquitting a guilty person, or are they both equally harmful, or do you not know? And unfortunately, certainly like lawyers like me, we all say, the worst thing that can happen is an innocent person gets convicted. We're sort of William Blackstone types. We believe in the presumption of innocence. That's sort of how we're taught as lawyers. Most people didn't respond that way. Most people also didn't say the only thing we care about is public safety. We don't want to see guilty people going free. Most people didn't say that either. The vast majority of people who get this question said that they're both equally serious. We don't want to see either type of error. We care about public safety. We don't want to see guilty people going free. We also don't want to see innocent people convicted, but we see them both as equally serious. And it's not just like sort of like a third of people or something like that. It's like 2/3 of Americans. And we were doing fancy studies surveying Americans of, sort of census representative in terms of age and demographics and part of the country. When we first did this, we thought, well, maybe I don't know, it was just like a funny group of people, or maybe they misunderstood the question. We asked the question different ways. We've now run this survey with tens of thousands of people. And every time we see the same thing, that the vast majority of people see kind of public safety and due process as both important, equally important. And when we ask it in ranking on a scale of 1 to 7, or what if you're going to pay tax dollars to prevent convicting the innocent versus preventing acquitting the guilty, like how many tax dollars would you spend on each? It always lands on, no, we care about them equally, 50-50. We'd spend the same amount of money. It seems to be a very deeply held preference. And so here's just kind of a summary table from one of these studies showing how this is across gender, this is across age, across education, it's across political party. It's Democrats, it's Republicans, it's older people, it's younger people. Just in general, it's like 60% or so to 70% of people all hold this view that these are equally bad harms. Now, certainly if you're on trial in a criminal case, you want the people who care the most about convicting the innocent on your jury. But it'd be hard to only get those people if 2/3 of Americans really view these both as equally harmful. This isn't just sort of like people's abstract view. When we ask them, these are mock jury studies. So we're giving people evidence from cases, asking them, would you convict the defendant in this case? And these views absolutely correspond with how people would behave as jurors. And so the people who view these errors as equally bad are much more likely to convict someone based on an eyewitness, based on the forensics testimony, whatever it is, than the person who mostly is worried about convicting the innocent. And so this reflects this broader social problem that most people don't only care about due process. They care about public safety too. And we see this in debates about crime. We see it linked to debates about immigration. If you tell people that, look, if we don't put these people in jail, like if we give people all these rights, there's just going to be rampant crime in your community. People are like, I don't want rampant crime in my community. No, but people also are very committed to fairness, and that's the good news. 2/3 of Americans also care about due process and about not convicting the innocent. And if people hear, well, wait a minute, we have innocent people being detained for no reason, people get very upset. And we've seen, an outpouring of concern about people being detained under recent immigration policies. And people are worried about, for incorrect reasons. So there's a lot of data showing that non-citizens commit criminal offenses at a much lower rate than citizens like me. I'm the one people should be worried about, not the non-citizen. But people are worried about public safety. People are worried about both. And so polarization can affect people's attitudes towards things. If they're told, like, the only way to be safe is to do X versus, wait a minute, there are false convictions happening. There are innocent people being convicted. So just to highlight a couple of other things I talk about in the book very briefly, I want to stop and take your questions. I talk a lot in the book about technology and how these inscrutable systems like this teacher evaluation system in Houston, but these days it's fancier sounding technology. It's often artificial intelligence. We're now seeing the federal government rolling out AI in lots of different agencies. We don't know how that's going to play out. I suspect it's not going to go well. It was simple systems that caused, and choices by administrators who explained those choices in Florida, where people were just getting these notices that made no sense. It was like just a cheap, bad mail merge where they didn't give people the actual reasons their benefits were being cut off. If they were given accurate information based on a simple mail merge, they could have corrected those errors more easily, perhaps. They would also need a call center that would answer their calls and other things. But if it's an AI system, it might, like, sort of the reasoning might seem more human and more realistic, and it might be equally false, equally biased, and equally flawed. And so there are lots of concerns with how AI is being rolled out by the government in ways that will affect our due process rights. And if it's not designed in advance so that it can actually tell you the real reasons why it's acting, then it's a black box. And we, just like the teachers in Houston, like we can't know what it's doing. And we therefore can't defend ourselves and say, wait a minute, it made a mistake. Why did it rely on my age? Or why did it rely on my income? That's not my income. My colleague Cynthia Rudin and I, Cynthia is a computer scientist who's developed interpretable AI models, saying, like, we don't have to not use AI. AI can be really helpful. She's a computer scientist. Like, computers can do amazing things. They can see patterns in data that we can't see. But it doesn't have to be a black box. It can be a glass box, and it can be interpretable. It can tell you, like, those teachers could have been told, this is the data that we're relying on to say that your performance is poor. And then the teacher could look at that and say, well, I can see right away why that's wrong. So we've written some things about it. I'm going to skip over that. I also want to note that in particular contexts, it's very, very hard to actually defend someone's due process rights. And so Mr. Arteaga here, his story didn't exactly end up so well. He actually got a very strong ruling from the New Jersey Appellate Court saying, yes, as a matter of due process, he needs to know how this facial recognition system works. It was used in his case. It's the reason he was arrested, really. I mean, it's the reason why his picture was shown to the eyewitness. He needs detailed information about that facial recognition system, the other faces it picked out, as a matter of due process to defend himself for a criminal trial. But it took 2 years to litigate those issues, and he was detained pre-trial that entire time. And so he finally decides to take a plea for time served so he can get out and see his family. I mean, he maintains his innocence, but he said, look, I can't defend my due process from jail. I just can't do this anymore. And so he took the plea so that he could go home and see his family. Similarly, many of those families in Florida that sued, some of them got their Medicaid benefits in part because of the litigation, but that case is still dragging on, and more meaningful remedies may take years for them to get. And so cases can move really slowly in federal court. The government can do things to people very quickly. So I'll stop there. I should have mentioned I teach at Duke. I have a center called the Wilson Center for Science and Justice. We have researchers and policy analysts and lawyers on staff. We do a lot of criminal justice work. We do some amicus briefing in cases that raise these kinds of due process rights. We do a lot of work on wrongful convictions, on sound use of forensic science in criminal cases. And we do a lot of work on the need for fairness in AI. And it's been a kind of exciting for me to be able to build this team, and I'm grateful to Duke Law School support as we've put this whole center together. But in a number of the projects that I've talked about are projects that I really couldn't have done without the team that we have at the Wilson Center. Anyway, I'll stop there.
Terrific. Thank you. Excellent. And I really did enjoy your book, by the way. And
thank you for reading it. Thank you all if you take a look at it.
It's terrific. Thank you both for excellent. If people want to hang for a few questions, I think Brandon, you and Carl are both willing to stay a few more minutes for questions. Sure. Okay. And if you put them in the chat or raise your hand, and unmute yourself and we'll call on you. Let's see. There are a couple
I
of
see some
questions
people who agree
already.
with the Blackstone maxim completely. That's good.
But I'm not, but the data was very compelling about how the people saw it both ways, kind of how it was presented. I'm going to go back up to some questions. Go ahead.
One thing about that, which I do think is helpful, just even in talking to other people about due process rights. I've certainly found it helpful in it because those studies surprised me too. Because I don't know, I agree with the Blackstone maxim. I'm a lawyer though, and I found, for example, that in talking about bail reforms in Houston and in Durham, where I live, I've been doing work on monitoring a bail reform civil rights case in Harris County for about 5 years now. Sort of knowing that many people care both about public safety and due process. They don't just care about rights. I often lead with public safety first. I talk about how the bail reforms in Houston have caused misdemeanor offending and reoffending to go down. It's been really good for public safety. And by the way, tens of thousands of people have their freedom and they're not ending up in the jail. But I start with public safety first, figuring I want to meet people where they are and explain to them that, look, it's not a zero sum. It's not like if we don't jail more people, we'll be unsafe. These reforms have been really good for public safety and they've been good for people's freedom. We can actually have both. It's not a trade-off. So that's what I've been trying to do both in this book and in conversations with people to because just sort of it really surprised me and was a learning experience for me to better understand the starting place that most people have.
Thank you. I'm going to go back up in the chat earlier. Let's see. I think this is for you, Carla. When do non-US citizens receive a notice to appear? When do they get that? Are these notices being handed out before, during, or after ICE apprehensions?
Perfect, thank you. I've been answering everything, so I'm gonna paste it in the chat in case I don't have the chance to answer all of them. But for the notice to appear, truth is usually people receive a notice to appear after encountering a US immigration officer.
Okay.
That could look like at the border, after the entrance, it could be CBP, but there's also multiple scenarios where, for example, someone can receive a notice to appear from ICE officers before, during, or after detention. And even in a non-detained setting, sometimes non-citizens have to report with ICE just to make sure like they can keep track of the immigration process and if it's still pending. And sometimes they do receive non-citizens the notice to appear with ICE. So there's so many multiple scenarios. For example, someone that has, this is another one, that has status, let's say a green card, a legal permanent residence card, and they commit a criminal, something that's criminal, they could eventually, even though they have the green card, receive a notice to appear. So there's many scenarios. I'm gonna put it in
Okay.
the chat.
All right. I think the next question was answered. People having a right to attorney, but they don't have a right to a public, non-US citizens don't have a right to a public defender. They have to pay for it. You said that earlier. So
Yeah, there's no right to counsel because they're considered
yeah, there's
civil
no right to
proceedings.
counsel, which is
Yeah,
kind of
people-
fundamental in our heads, right?
Well, and now the right to counsel is much more limited than people assume when they sort of see on TV. Like you're in court, where's
Yeah.
the lawyer? But in all kinds of civil situations, including in some pretty impactful ones, like where someone faces deportation. Another common one, I'm sure it's similar in Tennessee. Like the most common interaction with the government that anyone has is traffic tickets. And if you go to a traffic court anywhere, you'll see like hundreds and hundreds of people. Almost no one has a lawyer, except maybe in a very serious DUI case where they have private counsel. Our students at Duke represent people in misdemeanor traffic cases, and they're usually they're students, but they're the only lawyers often there, like anywhere in that courtroom. And people can have their license suspended indefinitely for non-payment of traffic tickets or for failure to appear in court. A lot of states have very punitive rules. Like, so very serious things can happen in minor traffic cases. No one has lawyers. And
Okay.
people assume in criminal cases, oh, but in a criminal case, you get assigned a lawyer, but not always that quickly. And
Right.
so in many places, that bail hearing that decides whether you are detained pre-trial or not, maybe that decision could be revisited later, but that initial decision to set the cash bail that might result in a money amount being imposed that you can't possibly pay, and you can't even pay a bail bonds person. That bail hearing may involve no lawyer, and the person may say all kinds of things that are damaging to their case because they're not represented. And so in many places around the country, there are a lot of important proceedings where no lawyer.
Okay. This has to do with third country drop off. Are people just dropped off somewhere, or are they sent to a prison, or where in the third country do they end up? I think that's still a
Okay.
question. Carla, you brought that up, so I think that's a
Yeah.
question to you.
I think that's the question then. When I was typing, took me the most time because it's a little bit complex. But basically, usually third removals are based on like agreements with the third countries, right? And I put on the chat an example of 2019 when there was like this migrant protection protocol program here in the U.S. and allow people to be returned to Mexico to await immigration proceedings here in the U.S. But long story short, I was explaining that there's what is known like a non-refoulement principle that says that basically non-citizens should not be returned, even if it's not their home country, to any country where they could suffer like torture, human right abuses, and they should have the opportunity to prove that in case they could be expelled or removed. But like I said on the chat, in practice, is a little bit different and difficult. And we have seen people being removed or detained, like in El Salvador and different countries. So that was a great. All of them are great questions, but that one was difficult.
I mean, it's
Go ahead.
unlawful. We've signed a convention against torture in this country. It's unlawful to send people to a country where they could be tortured, and they have a right to raise that issue because it's an international treaty. And people haven't been given that right. I mean, the Supreme Court did say, this spring that people must be given meaningful due process, including with a chance to file something in federal court if they're facing removal to a third country. But the administration's compliance with that ruling is highly contested. There's a lot of litigation going on now about, wait a minute, are people actually being given a meaningful chance to file anything in court at all? And they don't have lawyers. They need time to actually file a habeas petition means having access to a lawyer who can talk to you. But there may need to be a translator involved, and there may be a fair amount of work to do to figure out, is this person facing torture? And to know that, you may need to know, where is the government planning to send this person? If they won't tell you that, then how do you assert your due process rights? So the lack of transparency and the kind of speed with which the administration is trying to carry out deportations doesn't allow people a fair chance to raise very serious legal claims that our courts have taken seriously for many, many decades, because it's also a matter of, it's not just due process law, it's a matter of international human rights law. That's why we've signed this treaty against torture.
Are detained non-US citizens, do they have the right to seek release on bond while awaiting their immigration court proceedings? I don't think anyone mentioned.
They do,
They
but it's there has not been a generous practice of granting it.
Okay. And I think the last formal
There's
question.
actually, I mean, speaking of due process, so there was legislation passed by Congress, and we will see what happens in the courts. I assume that there will be due process challenges to it. It's called this Lacey Act, and it actually says, and this is unprecedented in this country, it says that if a non-citizen is arrested for shoplifting and a couple of other minor, like larceny type offenses, that person can be face removal proceedings at the point of being arrested. And so there's certainly precedent in this country for a person who is convicted of typically a more serious crime, but there are broad definitions of crimes of moral turpitude and the like. But the idea is, if you're convicted of a eligible offense, that could be grounds for removal from the country, typically serious crimes. But the idea that you could be placed into ICE custody and face removal, not based on being convicted of a crime, not even based on being charged with a crime, just an arrest. Right? And after an arrest, they haven't even found probable cause. That there hasn't even been a prosecutor who has gone into court to provide evidence, just minimal evidence like probable cause, that this person may have committed an offense. So people who have not been convicted and have not even had a probable cause founding, have never seen a lawyer, Prosecutors haven't seen the case either. It could now be face removal proceedings, and that's federal legislation passed by Congress and signed by the president. I assume it will be tested in court, but it's a really terrifying idea that because there's just no due process then, not even the very minimal process that you get at a probable cause hearing, where a judge at least looks to see is there some basis for this arrest, not even that, and that's. I mean, it kind of rushed through Congress and as part of sort of lots of post-election emotion around crime, immigration, and really quite remarkable. And we will see what happens when it gets challenged in court.
And I'm blanking on his name, maybe deliberately, but he was speaking yesterday, clarifying something to saying like, we just have to have be suspicious and we can pull somebody out. It was some kind of new language he was using that sounds like what you're saying, Brandon. I'm not getting it exactly right, but it was a
It is
change.
true that when police have reasonable suspicion of criminal activity, they can stop someone, they can ask
Right.
questions. It takes more than that to arrest someone, but they can sort of there is the kind of sort of informal stop that police can do based on suspicion.
Mhm.
So
Anyway.
yeah.
Okay, next question. How pervasive is lack of due process for immigration and Medicaid denials in the state of Tennessee specifically? So Carl, I guess, can you answer that question? Since it's Tennessee specific, if you can, if you may not know that sort of categorically.
Yes, I think I can talk about immigration. Let me go. Can you repeat the question? So sorry for that.
Sure, hang on a second. I was zipping along here. How pervasive is lack of due process for immigration and Medicaid denials in the state of Tennessee? Is it happening more? Is it happening?
I could also just tell you that there was a similar class action to the Florida case I talked about a challenge against TennCare, the Tennessee
Yep.
state provider, and a big class action saying that they were terminating people's health coverage also without giving people notice, without explanation. One of the plaintiffs actually they had mailed a notice which had faulty information in it, but it was mailed to a horse pasture, not to their house. And so they couldn't have responded to it because it went to a horse pasture. And so they said that they were wrongly terminating people due to faulty paperwork issues, faulty notices. And so that case is, I think, still being litigated, but they did find that there was a due process violation last August. I'm not sure what the remedy is yet, but they did say that thousands of people have been kicked off of Medicaid for problematic reasons. And we'll see what happens because this new federal budget legislation that passed will create new eligibility requirements for Medicaid and could result in lots of additional opportunities for poor notices, confusing instructions to create more national problems around Medicaid eligibility. That's
I think I can.
on immigration.
Yeah.
That's over to you, Carla.
No, but I think I can actually add, I will say yes, and I can add to something that Brandon said before, the example about people being detained. Recently, there was a decision that the interpretation of the law was that also people that enter without authorization, they should all be subject to mandatory detention. And which that means is that basically judges are saying, I have no jurisdiction based on that to even consider this person to be released in bond, which has translated in a lot of people like not being able to seek bond, which is awful. It has been happened recently. So I will say yes, I have seen a lot of problems and issues more with the court and all of this like bond eligibility, like opportunity to be released and stuff. Yeah, here in Tennessee at least.
All right.
Could I ask a question and I can't figure
Yes.
out how to type it in?
Sure,
If-
Susan. Is that you? Is that?
Yes, it's me, it's Susan.
Mhm.
If you I have a friend who's undocumented, been here 20 years, been on dialysis 8 years, single father. He finally got to he was having to get dialysis going through the emergency room, but through a special grant that an immigrant clinic here, medical clinic, got for him, he has a seat in a dialysis clinic. If he were detained and they were to try to deport him, he can't live 2 weeks without dialysis. Would there be any way we could help him? Is there any way we could step in? Is there any due process for someone who's dialysis is essentially life support. So, is there anything that can be any due process for medically?
Yeah, I'm gonna jump in, and I think probably Brandon will be helpful also. In my experience, well, first of all, there are like humanitarian protections and stuff, but lately I can tell you I have a client, actually a brother of a friend who was detained and had like a very serious disease, and we tried to release them on humanitarian parole. We also tried for him to receive a medical treatment in the detention center, and at the end the situation was so critical that the person had to ask for voluntary departure, or they were going to die on the detention center. I don't want to scare you. I want to tell you the law provides humanitarian protections and options. They also have a medical center, but in practice, it has been very difficult. Here is when probably a lawyer would be helpful to advocate. I don't want to scare you. There are protections. It's just like Brandon said at the beginning, sometimes when people don't have a lawyer, and even when they do, because lately it's a little bit lawless, it is very difficult to access medical treatment in detention. But if it happens, because I do see the serious concern, there are different like humanitarian options to try to help that person.
But we would need an attorney, right? And we would have to
Yeah.
privately get an attorney.
You don't need it. And there are also a lot of nonprofit organizations that usually can jump in the situations. Truth is, no one needs an attorney to have human rights, but lately in these times, usually it will be very helpful to have an attorney advocating and trying to help this person, because detention is lately not accessible to many people, relatives, and more if we're talking about a medical situation. You don't need it. You shouldn't need an attorney to have human rights, even if it's someone that doesn't have any documentation. But if it happens, I will say to try to get some help, because it sounds very serious.
Would it be like Catholic Charities? Who would we go to for help, though?
That's an example. I know here is because I'm coming from Texas, and we have, because we're close to the border where I used to work, we have a lot of nonprofits. You're right. Here is only like Catholic Charities. I think Bridge also. There's a few. I just want you to know that there are options, and the person should have access to medical assistance in detention.
I
But probably
assume, are there
go ahead.
some Tennessee immigration rights kind of groups that can
Yeah,
provide?
there's Turk, and we have Turk, and we have
Yep.
Justice for My Neighbor, and
Okay.
the Tennessee Justice Center, Catholic Charities. This person is a single father too, but the child is an American citizen, fortunately.
But that's the challenge. Like, I mean, obviously there are people who don't get the medical care they need, or at least they don't get it right away, detained in a local jail in a regular domestic criminal case. But you're entitled, at least within a certain amount of time before your preliminary hearing, to meet with a lawyer, and then that person can raise it right away with the judge if they say, like, look, this person has been detained for 3 days already and they're not getting their medication, right? And the problem in immigration cases is, since there isn't this right to counsel, who's that person that's going to advocate for you if you're trying to ask for medical help and your requests are being ignored, or they're not being adequately translated, or whatever the problem is. And especially when you have overcrowded facilities and a rush to process cases, which is what, you know, we
Well,
have a
he
priority.
needs dialysis 3 days a week. If without
Yeah.
dialysis, he will die within 2 weeks. He would die
Yeah.
in detention.
And it sounds
Yeah.
horrible. It sounds like it probably happens a lot more than we even imagine. I think I'm going to say that our questions have been answered, and I just want to ask everyone to just do some applause for our two speakers. Thank you for your time and enlightening us and troubling us as well. So, but that's good trouble, right? We were hearing that even recently. So thank you, Carl. Thank you, Brandon, and thank you everyone for attending. And next month, our webinar will be on media literacy. And I think you've already got a notice in email, and you can learn more about that. Thank you both again, and everyone have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. It's great to meet you all.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.